Hello and welcome to another book discussion in our IndigiLit series. This series is meant to highlight books by Indigenous authors, and today we will be discussing a book of short stories from 2013 called This is Paradise, written by Kristiana Kahakauwila, who is part Native Hawaiian, German, and Norwegian. And before we get into the stories, we'll just quickly introduce ourselves. My name is Marissa, and I work in the outreach department at the library.
And Ani, Ariel Ojibway Indiginas, Jijak Indodum, Bawating Indujiba. My name is Ariel, and Crane Clan is mine, and I'm from the Sault Ste. Marie tribe. And I'm so excited to read this book and talk about it with you all.
I'm Valerie. I work in collections, and I find the IndigiLit series very interesting and enjoy it.
I'm Elizabeth, and I work in the archives as a library technician, and I'm also very excited to talk about this today.
Yay! Well, does anybody have anything that jumped out right away that they're like, whoa, I didn't expect that, and I really want to talk about it, or that was included or that wasn't included? If not, oh wait, Marissa, were you gonna say something?
I was just struck at how almost every story included death as part of it. That kind of hit me like midway through the book, where I was like, there's this kind of heavy, and then it just like there was a lot in this book about like death, and I was not expecting that. And I did shed some tears.
I was just going to say they all have a kind of depressing overview, dealing with death, dealing with, just various things. They were all very depressing and kind of negative, which I wasn't expecting.
Especially for a book called This is Paradise.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's kind of like laid out in the first story, that dichotomy of like this beautiful scenery and then like the people living there that are native to the area are like exploited by all the tourism. And then like the tourist literally dies. There's just a lot going on in that first story, but it's also like the shortest one, I think. I liked all of them. I didn't have a favorite, I don't think, but I liked the whole thing. I liked all the stories. I also thought, like, I usually listen to books, but I couldn't find an audiobook of this. So I had listened to another book by a Hawaiian author, and I had like heard the pidgin. So it was a little bit easier to read, I think, having listened to that, but still I was like, oh man, I wish I could listen to this, but it was a good read as well, just physically reading, as much as I shy away from that now.
I guess I didn't expect the pigeon. I didn't think about that as this question, but I didn't expect it in the book because that's not something that like authors very frequently do anymore in my experience. So I was surprised. But I thought that it flowed very naturally, and I thought that in many places it definitely enhanced the story and like put you there more. And I liked reading an interview with the author who grew up with family in Hawaii and like in California, but like going to visit regularly and be with family. And then being like, and my dad checked it all. So I appreciated that aspect of it. But I didn't even notice all of the death. I mean, I obviously the first one and the last one. So yeah, readers, that's the tourist dying and the father dying. And then in the middle, there's also like the funeral, the whole like piece about the funeral. But until you were just talking about it, I was like, and then what are the other ones? But obviously the brother, and all of the chickens. And I don't know, I might be forgetting another story, but
yeah, her dead father. Like every story, even if nobody died in the story, there was a character who had died that they're talking about. it seems.
Yeah.
I also noticed that there are some overlaps in the stories. Like, I don't know if anyone caught that, but there were some like references in other stories to stories that had like come before. Like, I think some of the characters were related to each other.
I think I saw it in one. I only noticed it in one. Like two characters like came in at the end of some event, and I was like, "Were those names?"
I obviously missed that. I guess I'm not good with names.
Well, it wasn't like very. It wasn't.
So,
It didn't matter for the story or anything. You were just like, hmm. And also, like, that's probably a real thing in people's lives in Hawaii. Like, that's their islands. And apparently, so I didn't know like anything about Hawaii, really, except for the whole telescope protection of the mount. Yeah, other than that, I didn't know about them or the geography or anything. So that was really interesting to learn about the different islands and how even though Hawaii is the big one, it's like one of the less populated, and Oahu is the like city island. And so I read it a couple times, and the first one I was just like, I don't know what any of these words are or where we are. I can't really even picture it. I'm gonna choose like Santa Cruz or something in my head. And then like took notes on what the words, many words meant, and like looked up the geography, and I was like, oh yeah, I get it a little more. Has anybody been there or like experienced it before?
I was there in high school, I think. So it's been a long time.
Which one? Which island? Which city?
You know, I was in high school, so I was not paying attention a whole lot.
Yeah.
I know we did spend time at Waikiki Beach. So that,
Yeah.
that's for sure. And then, yeah, they're not so big. So we also did a lot of driving and stuff around. Yeah, I should have called my parents to check, but I didn't. And then now my only experiences with it, as I follow a fair number of like Hawaiian people on Twitter and TikTok, and it's kind of like, don't come here. I mean, especially during the pandemic, just because it's like, it's an island, there's limited hospital, limited resource. If you have to fly home, it's like 5 hours, like it's a long way. Yeah. And then also like just tourism and resources, and especially with the Navy poisoning their water supply, like I've just been hearing like different snippets from activists online. But yeah, I've kind of been frustrated at like, just like a lack of history, that in school, a lot of the US history is focused on like Revolutionary War, Pilgrims, Civil War, and then you're kind of done. Like maybe
we're kind of done.
Like they don't really talk about
ongoing colonialism and oppression.
Like, territories. Like they don't really. I never really learned anything about Hawaii, I don't think, in school.
Well, do you want to share any more that you've learned about it, or anybody?
I mean, I only know very basic things. Just that, you know, colonization, we wanted resources. I know the sugar industry like kind of took over, and then we're like, well, we want full control over this island, so we took it.
Yeah.
It's been I mean, that's like very basic.
Yeah.
To it.
Oh my goodness. I went down so many YouTube holes, and yeah, I was like, whoa, I didn't realize that it's apparently it was one of the only like non-European nations to be recognized as a sovereign nation in the late 1700s, early 1800s. So that was fascinating. And then I didn't really, because in this book, there are so many cultures all together. And I was like, well, when did that happen? And then some of these YouTube videos said that like, yes, after settlers started coming, it was a lot of whalers coming, and then to like, I don't know, balance out the whalers, the missionaries came, because the whalers, oh geez, there was a lot of prostitution and other things, other sort of exploitation in that way. And so the missionaries came, but they also started, the missionaries came at the same time as their like traditional religion had started breaking down because of all the settlers. And then when the missionaries came, they started planting a lot of sugarcane. And also it was like around the same time as the Spanish-American War, which was fought for control of like the Philippines and Cuba and some other places. And then American settlers were like, great, and now we're just going to export labor from there and bring all these people here to farm the sugarcane. Yeah, so those were some things. And then there were like 5 main sugarcane people, and guess who one of them was? Dole, like the fruit that's like still out there. Yeah, and the 5 main sugar people and some other ones conspired to make the US military take over, to overthrow Queen Liliuokalani, something near that. And yeah, and then they just annexed it. And after all the decimation of like by disease and settlement and violence in general and everything else, the Hawaiian population was like 40,000-ish or something by then. But like 38,000 people signed a petition that was like, don't annex us, and please put our queen back. And the queen went and met the president of the United States and was like, hey, what are you doing? And the president was like, oh, you're right, maybe that wasn't a good idea. But Congress was like, doesn't matter. Yeah. And then all the way in 1959 it became a state. And yeah, and then in the 90s Bill Clinton signed a thing that was like, ooh, that was wrong, probably. We just took over your country. So yeah. So Native Hawaiians, there's still a huge sovereign movement in Hawaii. And it's like there are different kinds of sovereign movements. Like one of them is people who had just sort of occupied territory. And I think it was in the 90s, and we're like, hey, this is ours, we're gonna be here, give it back, get out. And eventually they came to like some sort of kind of agreement with the state or whatever, who gave them like 40 something acres, and they've been living there and have their own power and are doing their own food and other things. And then on the other hand, there are these like, I want to say more mainstream or elder, but also equally like we are a sovereign nation people who so the queen, and it was like I don't know what it's called, a monarchy thing, like in Britain, how there's the monarch, but there's parliament and everything, constitutional monarchy, maybe. And yeah, everybody, they had that going on, and they had different positions and everything. So this other group is like, well, we have all of these positions, and we're just going to fill them, and we're just going to act as a government, and we're going to keep doing that until we have the power of the government back. So I think those things are really cool in tandem. Yeah.
There's
Sorry, I just YouTube ranted at you.
I think it's like,
that was good.
it's important context also, like thinking about it becoming a state in 1959 is just wild. Like all of us grew up with it just being a state, but like that wasn't that long ago, obviously.
Yeah, my mom talks about when it became a state because she was alive at the time, and it was like a big deal because all the flags had to get changed to add the stars for Alaska and Hawaii. It's just, like,
Wow.
kind of funny to think about. I also had been thinking a lot about this in tandem with Puerto Rico because, well, Puerto Rico came up in The Night Watchman, and how like both islands were colonized, and really Hawaii was kind of corporate pressure, and Puerto Rico then is still a territory. It's not a state, but now there is kind of a movement to get statehood so that they can like actually get resources and get certain things that they want. Whereas Hawaii is a state and they're like, actually, please let us go. So it's just interesting kind of parallels in tandem with each other that I had been thinking about. And Dole has been everywhere. So
That in tandem reminded me of the voting. I think under the Queen, Native Hawaiians could vote, and then as soon as they annexed it, no Native Hawaiians could vote ever again.
also, blood quantum comes back in because there is a housing, like they're islands, so there's not that much land, right? So there's a whole housing program where Native Hawaiians can theoretically eventually get access to land, but you have to be at least 50% Native Hawaiian blood to get on the list. And it's like, obviously, a lot of people are more mixed than that, and identity and heritage is complicated, and it's maybe not the best system, but it, like some people are excluded.
Maybe we could find out another way to do this.
Yeah, there's a lot there. Which anyway, in the book, it was a story. The couple that are on the road trip because they're talking about heritage. And like that one has been sticking with me a lot of like how it's the white guy, but he grew up in Hawaii and his family is like German, but he's Minnesotan, but he like doesn't feel like he's from there because he grew up in Hawaii. So he kind of feels Hawaiian, but isn't really Hawaiian. And she has Hawaiian ancestry, but is from California, I think, or
Vegas?
somewhere
Yeah, I
else.
think
And
she
I'm
grew
like,
up in like San Diego or something.
yeah. So having just this interesting discussion about like, where are you from? And I was really like, oh, yeah, wow, that's like, my family's also German, but I don't feel German. Like, I've never been to Germany. I don't speak German. They settled in the Midwest. My family moved around in the Midwest a lot. I grew up in Michigan, but like, I don't feel like a Michigander in any way. Just identity is weird and complicated, and I liked that story.
Wait,
Yeah.
Michigander? Okay, sorry.
Yeah. I felt like that one, like a big part stood out to me, like when they're driving and other parts in the story, he like compares her to the like her body to the island, and like says like her arm looks like the curve of the road, and like that just kind of made me think that it was a vibe of like he was possessive over not only her but like the island, and just like the way that people claim relation to spaces and tradition and things like that. Like he had a totally different concept of like relation to land than she did.
And just other beings.
Oh yeah, she was like, let's save this dog, and he was like, ew, you're disgusting. Like the end of the story was just like done with her because she had like maybe had a flea on her. Like
because she had a heart.
But they're also still gonna get married. It's really
know.
set up for success, that couple, I think.
Did you think they were gonna get married? So what
Yeah.
happened at the end?
He still proposed to her, but in like not his ideal way, I think. And then yeah, it seemed like, I don't know, I could easily see it being like, yeah, they just get married and then are unhappy.
Yeah, it was kind of left open. Like he was like repulsed by her at the very end, but like he didn't like do anything really, I don't think.
I guess
They're just like, let's get married.
There's the other story, I think it was The Portrait of a Good Father, where it was basically like, yeah, my parents were just miserable and my dad cheated on my mom the whole time. And like, it's like, why did they get married? Like, it's made clear that he's been cheating on the mom like forever. So yeah, I guess I was kind of like putting those together of just like, yeah, they're probably still gonna get married and just be unhappy.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's what we do in this book. Valerie, were you gonna say something about that story? Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I think that one really stood out to me too, because she did such a good job of like, yeah, portraying like a really gross couple. Like they shouldn't be a couple. And everywhere that they tried to like communicate, it broke down. And she also caught those moments where like the woman's going to say something, and like that could be a moment of connection, and then she chooses not to, and then says something about his driving, and it seems kind of like an insult to him, but she's like, no, like I like it because it's like good and safe and you're really slow, and yeah, but you can tell she's like, I am trying to find something to say here that's nice. Oh, oh yeah. And at the end, you're right. Maybe they did just stay together. I assumed that they broke up, but ugh, maybe they just stayed together horribly. Um, in the last story, I thought that was an example of a sweet couple that was really nice.
Do they stay together?
No. but they could have been. What?
Is anyone happy in this book?
But wait, listen, they were a couple for like a hot second.
They were.
And also, Peely, that's what I'm calling him. I really loved like all of the relationships in that story. I don't know, did anybody else feel things about that story?
Yeah, that was probably one of my favorites. I know I said I didn't really have favorites, but like that one and then the one where they're driving stood out to me the most. I've been thinking about them the most, I think, since I read them. But yeah, that one had a lot going on in it in terms of relationships. Like there was the sister, the dad, and then the new relationship formed between Peely and Albert. Was that his name? And it was also just a sad story. They were all a little sad. But you know, it's like that was the one that was like, this is about death, this is about your parents dying, this is about relationships that form around that and like the struggles you have around that, and everyone has to decide how they're going to engage with that process if and when it happens. Like if you're an adult and your parent is dying, you may not ever experience that, like if your parents died when you were young, whatever. But I just thought it was like a very universal experience, but obviously each person is going to interact with that differently with the family dynamics at place. And there was the part where he like gives the blanket to Albert was very intense. Like
and what, like in a good way, in a bad way, and just intense? Is it
maybe a bad way? I don't know. Like it was a lot to take in. Like the dad didn't really know what was happening, I don't think, but like the sister is like, what are you doing?
Well, Albert didn't know what the blanket like meant either. Like it's just this beautiful gift and you're happy to receive it, but
yeah, he was kind of left in the dark while everyone else is like, ooh.
I thought Peely told him one night when they were in the barn.
I think he was thinking about telling him, or maybe I don't know if in the barn he told him. I know the first time he brought it out,
it was my mother's. When they went to see the cattle, he put it down and he said, it was my mother's. And then he thought, like, should I tell him the story? And then he didn't tell him the story. And maybe Albert said, it's beautiful. So I think he had like some concept, but not the whole context. and I am such a weirdo, I guess. I thought that was a nice story. And I
It
thought that,
was, but it was
yeah,
very intense and very kind of depressing. I mean, it was very well written, and the dynamics between the people were really good. But yet, even if you haven't been there and watched somebody die, you got that experience through this story, and it's eye-opening, you know. Um, I've never actually personally watched somebody die, but I know my parents have, and it's kind of life-changing. And you kind of got a little taste of that with the story. But yet it was one of my favorites out of the book too. So
yeah, that's a good point. I think the author did a really good job of that portrayal, and especially although Albert was the love interest, Albert was also the nurse and did a really good job of like preparing the family by like giving them specifics of what was going on in the process that you see frequently. But I think one of the most beautiful things he said was when Peely was like, "What? Well, like, what's it going to be like?" And Albert was like, "It's different every single time, and this is your father, so you know that there's nothing that will be like that."
Bert was a good nurse for sure. I also really like the the portrayal of the sibling relationship between Peely and his sister, um, of just how it was like close and they loved each other, but it was also like it was fraught, especially growing up with a difficult father who would say mean things to them, and like how I think Peely was saying to her, like, you shouldn't let him make fun of you like that or talk to you like that. And she's like, no, but it's okay because then it means he's not doing it to you. And it's like this sibling camaraderie, and like it's just a really like realistic and beautiful portrayal of it, I thought. And I think she's a fantastic writer. I mean, I think that this story felt more whole and complete than a lot of like full novels I've read. So
Oh, I'm sorry.
I thought it was interesting too, how in the end you find out the sister has known all along that he is gay, and she has been like hiding it from the father. And he's like, maybe you shouldn't have done that. Like he wants to come clean and like have this relationship with his father where he's like truly himself. And he finds out his sister has been like helping him all this time keep it a secret, and he didn't even know she knew. So it kind of speaks to family dynamics, I think, a lot of times.
Yeah, I was wondering what the father would have done and or been like, because she says like, you didn't tell us to protect us or like to keep us from harming us or something, right? And he was like, no, that's not what was happening. um, yeah, and the father seemed like a good father, but also like Peely said, like he's a man of a certain generation, and he obviously, when they encountered the Mahu person in the big city, the father felt a definite way, and also in the beginning of the story that he was like sort of, he was making fun earlier. So you're like, well, yes, I get he could just be like that, like a man of a certain generation with one sort of idea, but also, yeah, if he knew, then maybe his perspective would have changed. I really, even though it was a very intense moment, the giving of the blanket, I think it was uh I think it was good. It was like the best coming out way that maybe that could have worked out in that story. I'm not sure, but the blanket was sweet. I was also thinking about it, just the balancing of like who is in Hawaii and when and why, because Pili, I think, doesn't want to be there mostly because culturally, like he can't be himself. And yeah, at the beginning of the story, it starts with tourism, but also people who are doing the labor of the tourism industry, and also the women who are like the pillars of the community, it said. And I thought there was a really good moment when she was like, maybe sometimes we don't want to be pillars of the community. Maybe we just like to be ourselves. And how when the tourists come in, those ladies are like driving around and they're like, why do you think you can just wear a bathing suit everywhere? Like this is a real place, this is a real city. And yeah, and just like who gets to be where and how is a thing that I think this author did really well in this book.
Yeah, the whole first story was just this like tension between locals and tourists, and like so tense, but also like they're still people and they still have these moments of like connection and distance. And yeah, it was very interesting. I liked that one a lot.
Yeah, I think the moments of connection.
Yeah, I like that one a lot because it gave me a different perspective on being a tourist, and maybe not doing the things that they say, like wearing the bathing suit all over the place and that kind of thing. And part of me wanted to think that, yeah, maybe I'd do that anyway and be that considerate, but part of me is like, no, I'd probably be the ignorant tourist. So it was kind of interesting and educational to read.
I love how though the people in the story, when they were thinking that, they were like, we wish that they would go like visit the palace in Honolulu, and we wish they would do this, but they don't go farther than like the nearest Starbucks. And then they're like, and honestly, we'd probably do the same thing if when we're on vacation. And I really liked that, like, and we're real people too, but also, oh, I wish they would do a little better. Hmm. That kind of makes me want to, yeah, go on a further rant about the homes and houselessness in Hawaii, but I probably don't need to rant about it. Just, it was, if you're wondering, there are plenty of YouTube videos and there are plenty of people who live there and are Hawaiian and who, in the videos I watched, said, like, we do like people and we are all about hospitality and we do want you to come, but we want you to go home and not move here because we need somewhere to live and we're not homeless, we're houseless because you're taking all the land. Whoa, always gotta go so happy. Let's see. Is there anything else that really hit you in this that you wanna?
Oh, that did remind me too of I think it was in that first story where the tourist woman is kind of like, ew, you Hawaiians are so rude. Like, you live in paradise, but like, why are you all so angry? And it's like, well, of course we're angry because we live under colonization and like we don't have freedom to own land or like do anything. And yeah, I just again was thinking about like who is allowed to be angry and not, and a lot of the like racist views of like people of color who are angry, and like just who's allowed to be angry and express anger is, you know, is upsetting.
Yeah. also, I think that that moment stood out to me too, because I'll never find it, because there's the moment of connection, because the bartender gives them all a shot, and then the tourist says thank you, and then the one girl's like, listen, that's not for you, that's for us over here, and says something that could invite the person to be like, oh, you're right, like, I get it, I'm a tourist. And if it says basically in the book, like, if she had acknowledged that, like, I am a tourist, I'm visiting, I'm different, but can we still be friends? Then they would have embraced her and wanted her to be part of the group and been looking out for her. But instead, she just has, that attitude of like, well, it's wherever I go, it's mine to take what I want and be treated how I expect. And like, not acting like a guest, like I'm coming here and I'm taking it. And I deserve it, rather than like, hey, grandma, can I come in? May I have a cookie? As we've discussed in other books. And then there is that, I'm gonna say always simmering rage, because I think it's always there, of like, but we're still being colonized and settled, and you're still exploiting us, and but like, you have to balance living also and like enjoying yourself out at a bar.
Well, it must be so frustrating too, of like all of these simmering things, and then the dominant jobs are all in hospitality, so like you're kind of forced to like just have a smile on all day, which is just like an extra kick you when you're down kind of moment.
And I mean, violence against women clearly happens in that first story, and I just imagine, as it being part of a service industry, tourist industry, place where people just come and go, there's probably a lot of that happening all the time. And it's alluded to at the beginning of like when the staff are supposed to say something if they see anything going on, and then when they do see somebody taking advantage of, they're like, that's their private life though, don't get into that.
Like everyone's like, we should have done something, we could have done something, but like it was already established that if they said something, probably nothing would have been done about it. And like, I think the younger girls, despite being like, whatever, she's a tourist, she is kind of like not really listening to us, whatever. They still tried to warn her in the end, I think, like as she's walking out, they're like, don't go with that guy. Despite the fact that they were like, whatever, she doesn't even deserve our help, but like they end up trying to help her. That's the way with all the characters. Like, it kind of struck me when you said the pillars of the community, and then the hospitality workers are standing around the girl like pillars, protecting her. So I thought that was an interesting kind of metaphor there.
Yeah, which if you extrapolate that too, of just like how often white feminism has this attitude of like, we're all women, we're all in this together, and then repeatedly like do this horrible stuff to activists of color or women activists of color, that it's like, really, we're still placing white supremacy above everything else. We're like, they've already had this bad interaction with this tourist, they've gone out of their way to say like, to try to protect her, of like girl code, like, hey, maybe watch out for this guy, and the tourist is just like, ew, like, I'm over you. And it's just,
you don't want us to have fun here, do you? Is like what she says. It's just like,
minus.
Yeah, what a good intro to paradise. And all of the tensions therein. I did like at the end of the funeral, where, I'm gonna just read it because I just opened to it. How lucky. understand that your grandmother is in heaven now, and heaven has fighting cocks and Heineken, poi, and dried ahi. Your uncle's teasing and your auntie's cooking and your cousins laughing with you when you talk. Heaven is them acting like this is where you belong. And if that's what Haole pastors call hell, then thank God you finally got here. I thought that was a really awesome thing to have right in the middle of the book of like heaven, this is paradise. We finally got a taste with the cockfighting and with the families and with the tourism and of what like real Hawaii is to people who live there. And then having felt all that, still this person is like, yeah, and this is paradise and I belong here. That was sweet. You want to talk about the cockfighting or anything else?
Yeah, I was gonna ask if anyone had any feelings about that one.
I ended up actually really liking that story a lot, which is hard because I have chickens and I love them, and it's a tough one, right? Of like, I love animals, and I want to be the woman scooping the dog off the road, and like I don't want my roosters to be fighting, but it's also that moment of like cultural relativism and like what does that really mean, and it's obviously like such an ingrained important piece of culture and how much it meant to people, and it was a little tough, but also like they cared so much for their birds and you could see that, but then they're still like letting them die and letting them fight, and it was a tough read, but I really liked that story for some reason.
Yeah, when I first started reading it, I was having a little bit of trouble getting into it. And then once I started, like, just got real into it and read it really fast, and it was great. But at first I was like, I don't know if I can do this because of all the things you said about like the animals fighting and then like killing their birds if they didn't perform, or like, yeah, it was difficult to read in that sense. But I thought it highlighted kind of like the multiculturalism there. Like the main character has a lot of different backgrounds in her family. She's part Chinese, I believe, like her father was Chinese. But she has this like extremely large network of family there as well. So she's really part of this. And then she's also dating this man who she calls the Indian, and he's from the mainland.
North Dakota or something. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you never really learn his name. He's just the Indian.
Yeah, I thought that was a great intersection of so many people and cultures. And I did not know that cockfighting was such a thing. And yes, immediately, first page, cockfighting. I was like, ooh, I'm not gonna like this. And then, yeah, it was a really good story, and you didn't expect her to like be such a loving tender of those animals, but also, woo! I don't know, when she was like, choosing bird to fight Mr. O, she got very brutal about getting the right bird, and I didn't know if that was part of like her like mourning and will to like win as part of that. I thought that maybe it was, because I don't think that she would have made the choices to just be like, this bird lost, out of here otherwise. I thought, but I don't know anything about it. Valerie, did you know about that in a way, or like?
I didn't, and honestly, I kind of skimmed that one because of all the cockfighting and everything. I didn't read it real in depth because it was getting to me. So I just kind of left that one alone. That was my least favorite out of all the whole book.
Yeah, when that was the second story, I was like, okay, this is going to be a different, somebody just got murdered over here, and now we're moving on to cockfighting. What world are we living in? But yeah, she did such a good job of developing that character and bringing her along from a place of like revenge to a place of letting go and not needing the same things that she started out needing. It was an unexpected ending, I think, and an arc for the character, and yeah, an intersection of so many peoples and a woman in a male dominated sport. So
Yeah, I thought a lot about that. Because her whole thing with the Indian is like he wants her to be this specific kind of woman, and what is femininity, and this was like her only connection to her dad. Like they really bonded over this, and it was her only way to like feel like her dad was still with her in a way, and being the only woman in the space. Yeah, there's a lot in there, a lot of feelings.
I really liked the end when she runs into Mr. O and he's like terrified of her. And she's like, I haven't thought about you in like a decade.
The ending was very satisfying. And it was like she did get out of the cockfighting world, but kind of on her own terms, right? She didn't do it for the Indians. She didn't do it for anybody else, really, just like what she felt she needed to do and where she was at. And then it was satisfying. And I'm also glad that she did have kind of revenge in her different way.
The best revenge.
Even though it's like, did she need revenge? Like, I guess they did murder her father, but her dad was also crooked and.
But she didn't know that.
She didn't know that, but then she knew it, and then it was like, ooh, maybe this is not.
I feel like she didn't really know it until like the last fight or something, right? So
yeah, and she was like already over it. She was like, this is the last one.
Yeah. She was like, yeah, working up to it because she didn't know and she had to get the thing. And yeah, the Indians' version of what she should be was, it was like, and women can't be brutal, or I'm sorry if you hear my dog panting really loudly over here. It's getting me out. They can't have the violence, they can't be brutal, they can't like have this dirt. I need you to be more refined. I need you to speak perfect English. I need you. Yeah. And then at the end, when she has become the things that he desired, she's like, well, like, yeah, sometimes I miss you and I wanted this and everything, but I don't actually want to go back to that life. Yeah.
He was also, his whole thing was like nonviolence. Also like these very strict rules for her about how she talked and how she did all this stuff. And I was like, it's a different kind of violence, but you're still being controlling and terrible.
Yeah.
Also, there's just a lot in this whole book about all the stories about just parents, like growing up and seeing your parents as people and having complex lives. And it's kind of like the sadness of growing up in a way of like realizing that your perfect dad who was an amazing cockfighter was actually a cheat, and maybe realizing that your dad is a bigot and like hates gay people, and realizing that your dad is, reckoning with your dad cheating on your mom all this time. And there's just like a lot of like kind of that sadness in this book. I think a lot of the stories had that flavor to me.
I think that's a really good way of naming part of what feels so like sad and nostalgic through it all. Yeah, it is like not a coming of age, but like a reckoning with how you've been raised to think or something like that. I didn't see that. Thank you for saying that. Just like I didn't see the death.
I also thought that like not only seeing your parents as who they really are and that kind of thing, but also different ways people coped with the different emotions. Some were matter of fact, some were avoidant. There's the whole one story about making the funeral a drinking game, and how people use different methods to cope with grief and with death and with sadness. And I felt like that was kind of a running theme throughout the whole book too.
Were there any copings that you like related to or stood out? I loved when I don't remember the sister's name at the end, but she was upset about not specifically her father dying, but obviously that's always laying over your head. And she was just like furiously cleaning, and the Tupperware was being thrown out of the drawers and it was everywhere. And I was like, I've seen that before.
Yeah, I think in that story, it's pretty like the best example of like the sister doing that. And then Peely is more like, I'm going to just go elsewhere. Just going to get out of here.
He really was.
Can't really blame him on that one. Sometimes you just gotta let the person let it out. Sometimes it's better if you just go elsewhere. So I couldn't really blame him for that.
But I did like how sometimes Albert's either like belief in him or a look like, what, aren't you gonna go ask her how she is? Made him like be a better person. I hope they get together. But also I don't. Like, they're living different lives. They're doing their own things. It was good that they had each other then. I don't know.
Maybe in like a decade, Peely will be ready to move back, or like they'll get together then. I have hope for them.
Maybe when Peely's retiring, they'll have like a retirement romance. Oh well, thanks for having this discussion and making me see so many different things about the book.
Thank you and facilitating. Also, shout out to Kristiana Kahakauwila. She got her MFA in creative writing from UHum. So she's also sort of local-ish for a time.
Totally local.
Here. And also it worked out because this is Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. So thank you everyone who read this book, and there are many other good ones out there. So I hope people keep reading some stuff by these different people, getting some new insights into things you didn't know about. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.